You knew Richard Medhurst when he was a young, new kid on the block with huge potential. Now he's still young, but he has an enormous reach across the world. He is a journalist of international renown. He comes from 1,000 years of Medhursts in England. Both of his parents are Nobel Peace Prize winners for their work at the United Nations. His father is a former Metropolitan Police officer. His grandfather, a former pilot in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War. His grandfather served the British Army in the First World War. He is a man of unimpeachable, impeccable character, which is why he was seized by 6 police officers. 6 police officers at the door of an aeroplane when it touched down at Heathrow Airport in London at the weekend, where Medhurst was to address a conference, which was also addressed by some of the most well-known radical and progressive political figures in the country. They had no idea where Richard Medhurst was. He went black. His phone was unobtainable. He was incognito in a prison cell in handcuffs under the Terrorism Act of 2000. I was in Parliament when that act was passed. I railed against it then. Little did I know that it would so quickly come to be used against journalists, far more often than it's used against terrorists. The conflation of journalism with terrorism is what led to Julian Assange and his more than 1 decade of calvary at the hands of the British state at the behest of the American empire. It is the same body of legislation which led to the seizure of another friend of ours, another British journalist living and working abroad, Kit Clarenberg of the Grey Zone. It is the same body of legislation which led to the seizure and the searching and similar incognito disappearance, incommunicado disappearance of a former British ambassador and parliamentary candidate at the last general election, the Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. Are you seeing a pattern here? Are you seeing a pattern which says that every time the British Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Office, the British government actually has the gall, the neck to put out a message saying journalism is not a crime, they mean journalism in Russia is not a crime when it's carried out by the Wall Street Journal or some other US oligarch-serving publication. That's the journalism that's not a crime. The journalism which is a crime is British journalists having to move overseas in order to beat the algorithm, in order to beat the arrest at an airport. In Medhurst's case, in handcuffs, transported in a mobile cage to a dungeon somewhere where even his parents, his lawyer, and his hosts at the weekend conference he'd come to speak at could not reach him, did not know if he was alive or dead. Medhurst is on the show in the second hour. You'll want to stay tuned for him to tell you the story from the horse's mouth. But as a long-serving, long-term, 7-term parliamentarian who saw all of this legislation going through Parliament at the hands of a Labour government, it has come as no surprise to me that it was a Labour government that arrested Richard Medhurst at the weekend. I knew that it would all come to this. Medhurst could not be more unequivocally opposed to terrorism. There is no person writing and broadcasting today who has denounced the British government's support of terrorism in Libya and in Syria. The British government are the friends of the terrorists in the Middle East, and not just the non-governmental terrorist organizations. I saw footage again today that I sincerely hope my children never see. I sincerely hope my elderly, almost 90-year-old mother does not see. I'm pretty glad that so far my own wife hasn't seen it. It was a child about the age of some of my own children and some of my own grandchildren. Its head flipped open to reveal nothing, a void. Its entire brains had been blown out by terrorism who attacked yet another United Nations school in the Gaza Strip. Salahuddin School was a precise hit on Hamas terrorists, say the terrorist government in Tel Aviv, where just in the last few days, an entire queue of statesmen have turned up yet again to shake the hand of the blood-soaked murderer Netanyahu. But if it was a forensic, accurate, intelligence-led hit on Hamas terrorists, why did it blow that little kid's brains out? Why did it kill 5 women and 10 children? Why did it murder and mutilate still more women and children in Gaza? We know from their previous hits in Tehran, in Beirut, in Damascus, Israel, and in Sidon in Lebanon today, a very precise hit on a single motor vehicle with a single target inside it. Why then must they murder, mutilate, maim tens of thousands of children, tens of thousands of women in an 11-month period in which they have murdered and maimed, getting on for 1 in 5. 1 in 5 of the prisoners inside the concentration camp known as the Gaza Strip. More importantly, from our point of view, at least. At what point will the number of beheaded children be too much for our ministers and our politicians? How many mutilated bodies of women and children will it take for this issue to appear on the news? The child I just watched will never appear on Western news, and not for reasons of taste, not at all, but because to broadcast footage of that nature would begin to unravel the manufactured consent of the public in the belligerent countries, primarily the United States and the United Kingdom. Other countries are available and involved, but there is no doubt that the head of this particular snake, a two-headed snake, is the government in Washington and the government in London, without whose money, weapons, material, diplomatic, political, and media support, that consent would quickly be unmanufactured. That was thrown into sharp relief in the last 48 hours as we watched the hideous, obscene, grotesque perambulations of the so-called Democratic Party at their annual convention. It's a rigged convention, of course. They even force, a bit like when the mafia used to send the leaders of the killing coalitions to the funerals of the rivals and fellow mob bosses that they had slain. They forced poor Joe Biden, bemused, bewildered, terrified he was going to do it in his trousers again on live television. Joe Biden went there even though he himself had been the victim of a political hit. And his assassins were all there to applaud him and to praise him. They praised his honesty and integrity in the very week that the American Congress revealed that the Biden family were enriched by $27 million during the course of Joe Biden's term as vice president some years ago. If you get $27 million worth of corruption as Barack Obama's vice president, is it any wonder that Barack Obama now has a property estate in New York, in Chicago, in the Hamptons, in Washington, D.C., and in Hawaii that would make a prince blush? The corruption of the American political class was nowhere more evident than in the performances, for performances they were, of Big Mike Obama as the warm-up act for her husband, Barack Obama. When Obama was elected first to Congress, he stated bluntly that he was broke. Now he's worth $100 million. And the property empire that he and Michelle have built keeps on growing. That would be of no concern to me. I'm not remotely envious of other people's money or houses. If they weren't up on a stage twerking class war rhetoric, and if they weren't up on a stage twerking anti-white, anti-racism sentiments, trying to whip up the ghetto into voting for a man and a woman's recommended candidate, namely Kamala Harris, who is now very firmly in the hood, having spent most of her life as an Indian American politician. She's now down with the kids in the hood. The Obamas, who live in lily white Hamptons, were up there talking about how this whole Democratic gig, this whole campaign of Kamala Harris represented a rising of people of color in the United States of America, when none of them, neither Barack nor Michelle nor Kamala, have ever done a damn thing for black people, for poor people, for working class people. The only thing they've done is fill their own pockets with dirty money from their time in public office. And I couldn't watch it anymore, because as I watched them all partying, I got to thinking about those headless children in Gaza being lacerated, being mutilated by weapons given to Netanyahu by Joe Biden and by Kamala Harris, and with the support of Barack Obama, with the support of Michelle Obama, with the support of Bill Clinton. He's worth $250 million, by the way. He's an even bigger grifter than the Obamas, at least a more successful one. All of these people are responsible for these headless children in Gaza. All of these people are working for the political forces behind Benjamin Netanyahu. All of these people are hirelings of the war lobby in the United States. Which brings me, we've got a very clever colonel, former Pentagon official, also coming up in the second hour of the show. Brings me to what on earth is happening in Russia. I saw President Putin today with Mr. Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, in front of a vast army of Chechen reserves about to go to the front line. The NATO ghouls and their slave media have been dancing with joy over the Ukrainian invasion of Russia over the last week. Yes, you heard that right. The Ukrainian invasion of Russia over the last week. But as so often, when you read the Financial Times or you read Bloomberg, the publications, the networks dedicated to keeping the rich informed as opposed to the hoi polloi, as opposed to the poor plebs who have to have sand thrown in their face, Bloomberg has pointed out that this so-called victory of the Ukrainians in breaching the defenses of Russia itself has actually hastened and made much more likely to be total defeat of Ukraine by the Russian armed forces. And very soon, the front line of the Ukrainian forces is collapsing as we speak. We'll be talking about all of these things on the show. We'll be talking about Richard Medhurst. We'll be talking about the war in Ukraine. We'll be talking about the DNC and the fake black people up there on the platform, and I include one on whom I shall close. The squad, the fraud squad, AOC, went up there as a keynote speaker, just as Barack Obama once did, for the so-called left wing of the Democratic Party. She claimed that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza, the return of hostages, and a permanent solution to the crisis, never ending, of Israel-Palestine. Every word of it was a lie. She knew that it was a lie. She knew that we knew that it was a lie. She was the lipstick on the pig of the Democratic Party, whose emblem is not a pig, but should be. You've come to the right place to discuss these matters with us this evening. It is the mother of all talk shows.